very warm welcome to our live broadcast in celebration of Africa Month. My name is Nikiwe Bikicha. Vodacom, as you know, is a Pan-African business whose growth story is an impressive one. From its local roots in South Africa, this business has grown and now operates in the DRC, Lesotho, Mozambique, and Tanzania. Now, through its investment in Safaricom, it has a footprint that extends to Kenya and Ethiopia. So Africa's development is a matter that's very close to home for Vodacom, and I'm sure for many of us joining the broadcast today. Today, we're going to explore the role of technology in breaking the cycle of food insecurity in Sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, as this is a celebration of Africa Month, which is marked every year in May, this year, Africa Day was celebrated under the following theme: the Year of Nutrition, Strengthening Resilience and Food Security on the African Continent. So it's therefore fitting that in line with this theme that we have this particular conversation today. This is particularly important because the reality of hunger in Africa is distressing, as I'm sure you'll agree with me. Now, according to the Regional Overview of Food Security and Nutrition in Africa, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization reports that by 2021, around 346 million Africans suffered from severe food insecurity, and an additional 452 million endured moderate food insecurity. That means that close to 800 million people, that's just over 60% of Africa's population, do not know where their next meal is coming from. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, those statistics paint a rather grim picture. So then in 2020, Vodacom, in partnership with Vodafone, Safaricom, and the United Nations Capital Development Fund, released a policy paper to explore just the nexus of these issues. That paper was entitled Towards a Connected Climate, Leveraging Digital Technologies to Break the Cycle of Food Insecurity in Sub-Saharan Africa. There, they unpacked three of the major stumbling blocks preventing African countries from improving agri-food systems, showing that only if we address issues around, for example, access to information and financial resources, improve overall farm efficiency and market access, and ensure equitable digital resources, can we finally unlock the potential of Africa's agriculture. The paper goes on to add that if we are indeed to deal with the problem of hunger and safeguard its natural resources and build resilience against market and climate changes, we need a renewed focus on the productivity and sustainability of the agri-food ecosystem. Now, this is where digital technologies can help us. While, of course, these solutions are not a silver bullet to solving all of the complex and multifaceted food security problems, technology can play an important role. Let's take a look now at this video, which is going to expand on this issue.
Climate change is a huge challenge for agriculture in Africa, reducing yields, heightening crop volatility, and increasing pest and disease outbreaks. It is estimated that by 2050, Africa will scarcely be able to farm enough food to feed itself, let alone export food to drive economic growth. There are an estimated 250 million smallholder and subsistence farmers across Africa who lack sector resources and support structures. In Kenya, Safaricom's DigiFarm platform is helping these farmers access financial services and agricultural information to increase productivity more sustainably and tap into greater market opportunities. To promote the importance of sustainability from a young age, Vodacom South Africa's Early Childhood Development Center Green program is using digital technology to educate young learners about sustainable farming practices, while food gardens at each center bolster community feeding schemes. Digital technology can play a powerful role in addressing food insecurity in Africa. Digitalization can help boost productivity, assist socio-economic development, and enable climate change resilience. But we cannot achieve this in isolation. We need collective action if we are to build a sustainable digital future for all.
Well, today's conversation will explore more of the stumbling blocks preventing Africa from improving agri-food systems and ask how the continent can leverage technology to realize its agricultural potential. To discuss this now, I'm joined by a host of very esteemed speakers who are experts on some of the issues that we're going to delve into. Let me introduce them and give them a warm digital welcome, if you may. Stephen Chege, who is the Group Chief Officer of External Affairs for Vodacom Group. We also have the honor and pleasure of being joined by Bobby Mello, who's the Head of Sustainability and Transparency at Vodafone. Justin Smith is the Head of Business Development at the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, in South Africa. Tlaki Nechitenze is the Executive Director of External Affairs for Vodacom South Africa, as well as the Chairperson of the Vodacom Foundation. And my final guest today is Pavesh Govender, who is the Managing Executive, Internet of Things for Vodacom Business. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you all, and looking forward to an insightful conversation on what are undoubtedly pressing issues for the continent. To our online audience, a very warm welcome to you. I'd like you to join our conversation now. You can do so by posting your comments and questions in the comment section of here on Facebook. Our team will be on standby to engage with you, and we'll try and address any of those burning issues as we can. Now let's get started. Earlier on, I indicated that the Connected Climate paper, which raises a number of issues for special attention to be paid to climate change and its impact on Africa's ability to grow food. Bobby, let's start with you. I mean, give us an overview. We know that it's a buzzword, it's a topic of concern for us, not only in Africa, but globally also, climate change and its impacts. Why is this so important?
Thank you. Well, happy Africa Month to everyone, first of all, and thanks so much for having me as a guest here. It's been a while since I visited your amazing continent, but I have some very happy memories there and hope to be back soon. So I'm sorry to sort of start with the bad news, I suppose, which is that we are in a really perilous situation for the planet. And despite the world being put on pause for several years for COVID-19, greenhouse gas emissions have continued to rise, and the past 6 years will likely be the warmest ever on record. So about 40% of the world's population now live in countries that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And the IPCC has recently concluded that just a very small temperature rise could now trigger significant risk to life. And sadly and cruelly, really, Africa is the most vulnerable continent to climate change, despite having contributed the very least to global warming and carbon emissions itself. So what does this actually mean? We talk a lot about climate change, as you've mentioned, but sometimes it's really hard to understand in real terms what the impacts are. Well, by 2030, it's estimated that 118 million already extremely poor people in Africa, so those living on less than $1.90 a day, will be exposed to drought, floods, and extreme heat. By 2030, Southern Africa is expected to experience a 20% decrease in rainfall, leading to increased droughts and turning even more of the landmass into desert. Over the coming years, extreme climate events such as floods, landslides, and droughts will increase with quite devastating impacts. And we've talked about food security and agriculture, and really the key risks there are reduced crop productivities, again due to droughts, and increased pest damage and flooding of some of that food system infrastructure. And then when we overlay the current population growth and also the stresses of the Ukraine war, we're seeing that the amount of food we're growing today will only feed about half of the Earth's population by 2050. And sadly, all of these impacts of climate change are more acutely felt by women, children, and the poorest and the most vulnerable in society. And really, those are the people who often have the voices that are least heard by policymakers and others. So we really need to act now, and according to the UN's latest estimates, investing $6 billion over the next 15 years seems like a lot, but it would actually avoid losses of $360 billion to come. So now that I've painted that slightly gloomy picture, let's talk a little bit about what we could do to make a difference. At Vodafone and Vodacom, we've always felt that doing business and doing the right thing for the planet should not be at odds with one another. And we've set ourselves a really ambitious set of targets to reduce our environmental impact over the coming years. So first of all, we've committed to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2040, which is a really big goal given our huge geographic footprint across Europe and Africa. Second, we're working on solutions to reduce our e-waste. So we really need to get to a point where we're actually mining our old phones for raw materials rather than mining our precious earth. And finally, we're using our digital innovation to enable others to reduce their carbon emissions and environmental footprint. So we've actually set ourselves a target to help other businesses avoid 350 million tons of carbon emissions by 2030. So that's about the equivalent of the entire carbon emissions of Italy in 1 year. And we'll do this through digital innovations such as the Internet of Things, which you'll hear all about later. So whilst the enormity of the climate crisis can seem really scary, there is a lot that we can do to invest in solutions that will build a resilient and prosperous future for Africa and for the world. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more about them in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bobby. It's really interesting that the action has got to be commensurate with the enormous challenge that we're facing, not only on the continent, but globally as well. So some of those ambitions that you've just spelled out are certainly encouraging and clearly how the world needs to start moving as well. I do want to explore a bit further with you later on. You highlighted that women generally will be the worst affected and other vulnerable groups. And how then do we bring them into those decision-making roles, particularly when it comes to building resilience? I'll touch on that with you later, but Justin, let's bring you into the conversation now. Bobby's already touched somewhat on the impact that climate change will have on food security, but you've recently done a report as the WWF on Agri-Food Systems. Can you shed more light for us on that?
Absolutely. I think Bobby has highlighted some of the key climate risks, but our food system is so complicated and so interconnected that we're really trying to explain the social and environmental context of within which our food system is operating and how it's not working at the moment. So we've mentioned already some of the food security issues we see across the continent, and that really plays out in so many different ways. People who obviously don't have a good idea around where their next meal is coming from, stunting in terms of the impact on our children in Africa as well. And then at the same time, the sort of food and health system issues we see as well. Non-communicable diseases related to diet are now the biggest killer of people across the world. And often even in the same family, you can have a kind of issue with obesity and malnutrition as well. So we need to look at these kind of interconnections between the environment, between social issues with food, and also the impacts that food's having more broadly. From a climate and biodiversity perspective as well, the food system is critically impacted by what we're seeing from a climate perspective, but it's also one of the biggest causes of biodiversity loss and some of the climate change impacts we see. So there's this kind of concept of double materiality, both dependency on nature and also impact on nature happening at the same time with the food system. So it's really important for us to look at building more resilience in our food system through things like improving soil health, supporting the development of smallholder agriculture, so we have more resilience at a local level rather than these massively interconnected and very strong dependence food systems that we see at the moment. Bobby mentioned the Ukraine situation, and just in the last 3 months, we've seen approximately another 40 million people in East Africa who are suffering from food insecurity because of the disruptions we see in our food system due to the conflict in the Ukraine. So building local level skills, using technology to bridge those skills are really, really important. And that's why I really want to applaud Vodacom for A, having this conversation, B, working with a range of partners, including WWF and others, and then also really trying to look at solutions and the role that technology has in developing those. It's a really important part of figuring out how we're going to kind of operate within a new normal space. we've certainly, from a climate perspective in South Africa, experienced the kind of two extremes, two massive level extreme weather events in KwaZulu-Natal in the last couple of months, and way off any kind of prediction in terms of what people had thought would happen from an extreme flooding perspective. And at the same time, in the Eastern Cape, one of our key cities, Gqeberha or Port Elizabeth, that's really very close to running out of water after a very long-term drought. And these extreme events in a country like South Africa, where we are already one of the 30 most water-scarce countries in the world, is really where the heart of some of our climate change impacts are going to lie. So technology and awareness, and I think corporate shifts around water is going to be one of our key levers to really manage the long-term climate impacts that we're concerned about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Justin. It's extraordinary as you just painted that picture. We are already seeing the devastating impacts of climate change quite vividly here in South Africa, and over a very short space of time. A few years back in Cape Town, there was a drought unprecedented for that time. So really, all role players, all stakeholders have to put shoulder to the wheel now in addressing what is an already present crisis. And of course, let's not limit our focus to South Africa only, because this is going to cut across in various specific and nuanced ways across the continent, and our response has to match those particular problems. So thanks for filling us in and building on that picture on the impact of food security specifically. Tagi, if we could bring you into the conversation now. We've heard a little bit from Bobby and Justin as well about the importance of resilience. How can we ensure a resilient and regenerative food system that not only supports a healthy environment, but also has access for all to nutritious food?
Thank you very much. Context is very important, and thanks to Justine and Bobby, who have already said the context. There is no denying that food security is a global concern, and it was exacerbated by COVID-19 and also now geopolitics. But at the center of this is climate change, which has an adverse effect on food security, especially in the African continent. Now, when talking about climate change, we need to look at intersectionality, which is my area of passion. In the past few years, Nikita, you would remember just in South Africa alone, we are witnessing extreme temperatures ranging from drought and floods. And both extremes are bad for agriculture. Not only does extreme weather impact our soil through erosion and desertification, but it also affects our water levels and access to water. And I need to mention that with water insecurity comes other societal ills. That is why intersectionality is very important, especially in the rural areas where women and girls fetch water from rivers. When girls have to walk long distances to fetch water after school, it means that they don't have time to focus on education. When water is scarce for general household use or consumption, it means unhygienic settings. For girls, it means they can't go to school when they are on periods because they cannot bath. Mothers cannot do general household chores. And let's not forget the fathers. The fathers, mainly the fishermen, cannot fish, meaning their livelihoods are threatened and they cannot feed their families. And we know in South Africa with high levels of gender-based violence that some men feel emasculated when they cannot support their families. So food insecurity forces girls to use their bodies to feed themselves and their families. And emasculation, unfortunately, can lead to domestic violence or gender-based violence. And of course, we should not forget the commercial farmers. If they cannot produce in order to feed all of us as the nation, it creates depression, leading to increased rates of suicide. So how do we solve for this food insecurity challenge? We need to identify the triggers of food insecurity and solve for them. Through the purpose pillar on digital societies in Vodacom, we're already doing a lot with Mezzanine and IoT.next, who are our subsidiaries, to support the agriculture sector to mitigate against and to adapt to climate change. On inclusion for all, which is another pillar of our purpose strategy, we have a partnership with UN Women and South African Women in Farming to support food security in rural areas for women through a Women in Farming program. This we are driving through the Vodacom Foundation together with Vodacom Business. The program is supported by Mezzanine through a digital farmer solution. However, our enthusiasm to deploy the technology was dampened when we learned that the majority of the women did not have digital literacy to use the platform. So we did not run away. Instead, we decided to provide these women with digital literacy skills and also business management literacy so that they should be able to use the technology and grow their business. So far, we have trained over 2,000 women. And we've also seen an uptick in the adoption of smartphones among these women as they become more digitally literate, which is a plus for us because they now have access to the internet. They can access information about farming, and through WhatsApp groups, they share learnings and experiences on the farming trends and the threats. And talking about smartphones, I need to talk about something phenomenal that we did as Vodacom. We launched a 4G town in Mpumalanga, Vakerstroom, where we encourage the community to bring back their 2G and 3G devices, and we swapped them with 4G phones and other devices. So the entire town is now 4G lit, which is very amazing. And to conclude, early this year, we launched a green ECDs, Early Childhood Development Centers, with NBI powered by solar panels. And we are promoting for these ECDs to have their own vegetable gardens so that they should be able to feed themselves. And through these initiatives, we are able to contribute to general food security in South Africa and also in the continent. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dagi. I'm so glad you've touched on the intersectionality that we're dealing with here when we talk about climate change or food insecurity and the ripple effects, the long-run effects that it has on society broadly. It's quite troubling. And I don't think it's something that people sufficiently explore when they discuss these matters. So thank you for bringing that and elevating it as part of this discourse. Stephen, as we've heard in our discussion thus far, the statistics are alarming. Nearly 800 million people in Africa will go to bed hungry each night. What role can small-scale farmers play in climate action and food security in Africa? I believe Justin did touch on this, but if you could expand on it for us.
Thank you, Nikki. And I'll build on the context that has been set up by my colleagues ahead of me. And I mean, that's a sad statistic, 800 million people. And to put it in context, the population for Africa will double by 2050. This could mean that even more people are going to bed hungry if our current situation maintains. The thing is with Africa, a lot of our farming is based on family farm holders. And if you look at the statistics, there are over 33 million farms in Africa that have a size of less than 2 hectares. This means that these are smallholder farms, and this is actually what the face of farming in Africa looks like. And this really exposes these smallholder farms directly to the issues of climate change that my colleagues have highlighted. And it doesn't give them the capacity to be able to produce and farm as well as they could. But what can be done? Based on the information that we now have, there's good technology that we are deploying to ensure that farmers have the ability to be able to use even the smallholder farms to make the best use of the farms. We have programs that have been mentioned by my colleagues that link capital, information, and markets for the farmers. And the capital, we have ways in which farmers can be given the seed capital that they need to be able to do farming at a more advanced level and make sure that they're more sustainable. This has been one of the biggest hindrances for growth in farming in Africa. Lack of enough capital to ensure that they are able to survive season to season and be able to, not even to scale, basically to survive and produce enough food for them and their family and a little more just for sale. In terms of information, farmers just lack a lot of information about the right soils, what is happening around climate change in terms of planning, which could then allow them to do the right kind of farming and get the right kind of insurance in case the rains fail, because this is happening a lot with climate change impact on Africa. We then have information that could help them over a period of time learn what is the best kind of farming to do in their farms. And we're filling this gap with DG Farm and products running off the mezzanine platform, which are giving the farmers a long-term plan of information that they can use to ensure that their farming is more sustainable. Another component of this that is really critical is markets. A lot of the farming that is done is not connected directly to markets, so that farmers end up having produce that is a glut that they may not be able to store and sell, or have lows when there's scarcity of rain or particular kind of ingredient. So what needs to happen in this space, and what is being connected in this space in terms of the technology that we're deploying, is enabling the off-taking of the farm produce and the ability for farmers to predict the seasonality and what should be their focus in terms of their effort. Through this means, we can enable the farmers to ensure that they have food for the table, and then food that can actually start being put to the market to ensure that other areas that may not have this kind of food is available. The platforms that we are relying on for this have been mentioned. Mezzanine is a good example of this, and programs specific to each of the different markets, such as DG Farm, which is growing very well in East Africa, addresses this kind of areas. Through these efforts and through technology, Africa can be able to get the farmers to farm and produce what is needed, when it is needed, and how it is needed. It will also address the issue of storage, and also ensure that they have the right information within a fluid climate change scenario to be able to react and actually do the right kind of farming. So the farmers in Africa are not powerless in this situation. Through technology, we can be able to address some of their key concerns and fill in the gaps that allow them to be better prepared and to survive and to kind of get through the challenges that have been brought upon them because of the fluid and quick changing nature of climate change. The last point I'd like to make on this issue of farmers is information that is able to actually get them from being small-scale farmers to the next layer. As I've said, farming in Africa is basically family-based, but the information that we can give through access to our platforms can get the farmers from that level of being producers for the table to producers for the next market. I think that will be transformational and will make sure that it is a more sustainable story for Africa.
Indeed, so insightful, and really learning a lot about what the possibilities which are enabled by technology, which I think to some extent sometimes we take for granted. Pavesh, we've heard from Stephen, we've also heard from Taki talking about the importance of digital solutions. We know that they're not the silver bullet, but how can these sustainable digital solutions help to meet growing food demands, for starters? And talk to us about some of the existing technology solutions that can help farmers and the agriculture sector as a whole. I know that Stephen has already touched on what some of those are.
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. Nikki, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat this morning. Like you said, technology is not the silver bullet, but as Taki, my colleague, alluded to, it's really about the intersection of multiple issues. So, and technology does provide the glue in which it can bring together multiple facets about this. I mean, if we look at it, we talk about providing global food security. What does a global supply chain of food need to look like? It needs to be inclusive. It needs to be hardened at the bottom, from the smallholding farmers all the way to your large-scale commercial farmers. And the only way to do that is to use technology to build these global marketplaces that everybody can participate equitably. Some of the solutions that we can look at that's been deployed today, and my colleagues alluded to, is really around DigiFarm, widely used in East Africa, to connect smallholding farmers to large-scale producers like Unilever, to allow them to participate not just in a local supply chain, but a global part of a global agile supply chain. Taking that forward and looking some of the large-scale commercial industrial farmers, there's platforms like My Farm Web, which allows commercial farmers of scale to not just see what their output or their crop productivity is like, but they are also able to see productivity and yield per square meter or of the farm. Now it takes it from a macro level of looking at a farm or a geography at a whole scale level down to a microscopic level, even down to a tree or a branch level productivity. Now this giving insight to farmers on how to produce, what to produce at the right time, using the right inputs and the right level. This gives, talking to about climate change and global shortage of natural resources. Now farmers and stakeholders can use natural resources a lot more effectively and efficiently. Talking about technology, everything from managing water down to per square meter level. This really providing powerful power to the community to optimize productivity and output around that. And we talk about technology and we talk about it in such a broad scale, it seems as if it's not happening today, but it is. It's happening at the lowest levels of form through the use of mobile technology and smartphones that Taki's alluded to, all the way to more efficient, complex solutions in your larger scale commercial farmers, because the optimization of resources and the use of resources is absolutely critical, and farmers realized that this is key for their sustainability long term, and we're seeing the embrace of it. So with solutions from companies like IoT.next, we are able to actually monitor productivity, not just of water utilization, but of energy on the farms, embracing natural solar power and renewable energy on farms. So really teaching and empowering our agricultural sector on how to use natural resources more effectively to produce the maximum output. So we're really excited about a role in which we have to play in solving the broader problem around food security, and building inclusive, agile ecosystems around agriculture, but also what we have to bring to the party through our companies like Mezzanine and IoT.next, and our role to play. So really excited about what technology is doing, but also what we can do together as a partner in the global problem-solving initiative.
Absolutely. It really is fascinating to learn the role that technology is now playing and will be playing in the future in tackling so many of the complex and multifaceted problems that we face, including food security and the impacts of climate change. Because given the picture that we sketched earlier, it's certainly frightening to think that food and people going hungry could be such an enormous threat. Yet, if technology can enable a difference to some extent, really, then there's a lot to be learned from that. And these are not technologies which are, hugely prohibitively expensive or out of people's way. We're talking about the very humble mobile phone, which has turned things around extraordinarily, particularly on the continent thus far. Bobby, I did say I would come back to you on the issue of the impacts of climate change as you unpacked them. You mentioned that women and other vulnerable groups are likely to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change. Could you give us a sense, in your view, or how you understand it, what kind of resilience or empowerment we can build in to ensure that women find their voice and, in fact, end up in decision-making roles as defined earlier?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think women bring a really key perspective because they're often really at the heart of communities and understand the dynamics and the impacts. And I think women are brilliant sort of problem solvers and can drive that change both at community level, but also at government level. And there's now a whole load of research that shows that when women are brought into the fold, we get better climate outcomes, including in parliaments. We have statistics that show that climate policies are much more likely to be adopted when there's a higher percentage of women in parliament. I think in the Africa context, Taki has expertly outlined how the issues of health, education, and climate change are all linked. And we really need policies and approaches that recognise that there are these very unique threats and challenges to girls and women, and we need to take these issues seriously. So that means pouring extra resources into ensuring girls remain at school and have access to healthcare and sanitation, and all of those opportunities aren't put at risk by climate change. I think we also need to empower women smallholders with the same resources as their male counterparts, and also empowering women to access the internet. So we know that in the UN's defined least developed countries, women are still 22% less likely to have access to the internet than men. So at the local level, I think it's all about investing in women and girls. At the government and business level, we simply just need more female leaders. And I'm always really inspired by the female leadership in Africa. You guys really lead in women's public leadership globally. I think of the top 20 nations for women's representation in parliament, 5 of them are African countries, which is incredible and I find super inspiring from here in the UK. So I think it's just about kind of, investing in education, empowering women, and also for women to remember that like the world needs you, and when you have those moments of self-doubt, always come back to that that reminder that everyone needs your voice and your perspective as women.
Okay, great. Justin, when we spoke earlier, you spoke about the importance of the partnerships that have been built with corporates, everyone putting shoulder to the wheel. We've focused over the past while on the importance of technology and how digital resources are going to help us bridge the gap when we deal with food security on the continent. But all, of course, requires financial resources. How do we tackle that particular challenge?
That's a big question, Nikiwe. I think what we've seen through a lot of the research we've done across the world is that there is actually money available, but a lot of the incentives are going towards the wrong activities or the wrong actions, even within the food system. So redirecting incentives is a big part of some of the global work that WWF and other partners are doing at the moment to try and get a global biodiversity agreement in place during the course of 2022. Why this kind of global biodiversity agreement is really important is very simply we rely on nature for pretty much all of the food that we produce across the world. So if we don't have that system operating effectively, it's only going to make the current food security challenges we have at the moment even worse. So I think if we start doing that work around redirecting subsidies, that's one of the steps. It's also really important for us to look at what are the kind of funding mechanisms that bring in smallholder agricultures into mainstream funding agreements, whether it's through the commercial banking sector and commercial insurance sector, or through some of the microinsurance and banking products as well. And then I think from a WWF perspective, alongside all of that, we want to try and look at other ways to fix our food system. And we sort of look at 5 key areas for that. One is very much around the water thematic that we've discussed today. So making sure water access is critical, that we're much more efficient in terms of usage of water, and that the agricultural system is not causing water quality issues for both communities and nature as well. We're looking at regenerative agriculture as a really, really important thematic. So I think Taki earlier mentioned soil health as one of the key levers for this. So trying to build our soils effectively is one of the key ways of also combating climate change, because soil is 4 times more effective than most of our plant species in actually absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. So if we can reduce some of the artificial chemicals, pesticides and fertilizers we use in the food system, we can really build our soil health and improve it so that it's much more resilient to deal with some of the impacts of climate. I think as consumers and as businesses, looking at key commodities is really important as well, wherever they come from across the world, and make sure that those are sustainably sourced. we also have two other big kind of shifts that are really critical and important. The first one is really trying to reduce food waste and loss. So at a very simplistic level, about a third of all food is wasted across the world, across the value chain. And that's a pretty criminal kind of statistic when you reflect on what we've spoken about in terms of the number of people going hungry across the world and in Africa. So if we can really try and use technology, use other mechanisms to reduce food loss and waste as businesses, as farmers, and as individuals, that's a critical lever for improving our food system. And then finally, sometimes a less popular one, but it's important for us to also talk about dietary shifts. We need people across the world to understand the impacts of their food choices on a daily basis, particularly people in the sort of higher income groups. So if we can get those people to sort of shift some of their dietary decision making, it allows more access for food in lower income communities as well, given we've got a limited planet that we can actually grow all of this food on that we need to feed our current and future populations as well. So these systemic issues do deserve and require partnerships, and again, it's so positive to see Vodacom and Vodafone Group driving this access to information and the technology shifts that we need to do this over time.
Some very interesting themes that you're highlighting there, Justin, which I don't think we sufficiently explore either, such as the wastage at higher levels as we talk about food security. These issues are systemic and they have to be dealt with by various role players in society. So Taki, we've heard from Justin about the importance of partnerships. You've told us about the role that you're playing along with other stakeholders and this research that you've done as it pertains to using digital technologies to bridge the divide, particularly when it comes to dealing with issues such as food security and the impacts of climate change on the continent. It's all well and good, of course, to generate this knowledge. How do we ensure that the information that you have and your findings get to the policymakers and they're in fact implemented?
Thank you very much, Nikiwe. I would say that as Vodacom, because we are constantly, hungry to learn, we are always conducting research, and the research that we conduct, we don't do it in a vacuum. We have to share it with all the stakeholders, as you have mentioned. And what underpins this is our belief in partnerships in order to address societal challenges. So we don't just believe in technology. Partnerships are key because each partner, whether you're talking about government or you're talking about civil society or private sector, has something to bring to the table. It starts with dialogue, so that there is alignment on what needs to be solved. And we also need to agree on who brings what to the table. So we as Vodacom, we bring technology solutions, and we also create platforms for dialogue, such as the one that we are having today. And in everything that we do, Nikiwe, we are guided by the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is the ultimate goal, actually, which is relevant for this topic, is to fight hunger and poverty. We subscribe to the SDGs in all our markets. And what you would find very interesting, I heard that you are in the National Planning Commission, or the new name for that. We also subscribe to Vision 2030 agenda in each one of the markets. And what we have found in Vodacom South Africa is that there is very good alignment between the Sustainable Development Goals and the National Development Plan, which means that the Planning Commission was a visionary. And therefore, because of that alignment, it helps us to deliver on the research that we do and on the work that we do. And Vodacom is also a signatory to the Global Compact. But I just want to highlight one issue, Nikiwe, which is that the South African government is a signatory to the SDGs. And as far as I know, government submits its SDG progress to the UN relevant committees. However, there is lack of coordination between government and the private sector, in particular on the implementation of the SDGs and the NDP. For instance, everything that we do as Vodacom, we tie it back to a specific SDG and to the relevant section or chapter of the National Development Plan. And we strive to follow the targets set by government. But government does not circle back to the private sector so that there is alignment. So we've already started discussions under Business Leadership South Africa to say, how can we, as the private sector, especially JSE-listed companies, because we are guided by the SDGs, how do we ensure that the work that we are doing using technology and all our resources feeds into the work that government is doing, so that government should be able not just to meet its targets, but also to show at a global scale through reporting what we are doing in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thanks, Jackie. That's very encouraging. I won't wear my National Planning Commission hat, but it is encouraging, and certainly we look forward to working closely with you as well. Stephen, as we lead towards our concluding this conversation, there's always the danger or the temptation that we, when we talk about Africa, we almost universalize it and flatten it as if there were one entity. To what extent do you think some of the solutions that you are looking at, whether they're digital or etc., are specific to the needs of those communities or that particular country? And we don't flatten the response as if there were a universal singular Africa to be spoken of.
Yeah, good question. And it appreciates the fact that different countries are approaching the challenges differently and coming up with all homegrown solutions that that work for them. And I can give you an example of iProcure. iProcure is one of the largest digital agricultural chains in Africa. And in a market like in East Africa, they have done very well. And what they do is provide an end-to-end view of farming. And earlier when I spoke about capital, I spoke about information, and I spoke about the market. And iProcure sits in the middle of this as an example and ensures that the farmers have what they need at the right time and are able to actually do the whole end-to-end. If they need the seeds in terms of its planting season, there's financing around this to ensure that they're able to procure the right seeds, put them in the ground. When they grow, there's an off-taker market that is ready to take this off. And Africa really is not one entity. We have different challenges in different parts. If you go to the north part of Africa, where there's a huge discussion right now around preventing the growth of the Sahara Desert and basically preserving the Sahel and pushing back on the Sahara. There are different solutions that are being developed for that market that rely on technology. And those solutions are about what can be done by the local communities based on the information that is available and technology that is sourced from globally to kind of find solutions that ensure that they stop the growth of the Sahara. So Africa is not one market. Africa is not one country. It's got different solutions. But to speak more broadly about technology, technology underpins and serves a really critical area in this discussion. Without technology, farmers would really be in a very difficult place in the sense that they'd have to relearn and develop things that have been done elsewhere. So technology is also underpinned by capital. Farmers need to have access to predictable capital to be able to undertake farming in a meaningful way. And the way this has been resolved in Africa is through platforms like M-Pesa. M-Pesa serves over 51 million people across Africa, and many of them are farmers who are able to use M-Pesa to raise capital, to allow them to acquire the inputs for farming, and also to be able to generate a credit history that allows them to borrow against and ensure that farming is not disrupted because of lack of capital. In this way, Vodacom and Safaricom are able to bridge the gap for farmers and ensure that one critical component of the farming triangle, which is capital, is always available to them in amounts and in consistencies that are easily accessible.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Stephen. That is indeed fascinating. We've heard from all of our speakers the critical role that food security is going to play and continues to play, and is an area of concern here on the continent. So if we are to feed Africa's growing population and safeguard its natural resources and build resilience against market and climate change, we need a renewed focus on the productive and sustainable means of growing food, as our speakers have shared. So before I close off this conversation, let's allow our panelists to give off their parting shot. Bobby, I'll start with you. Your closing thoughts or ideas.
Thanks so much. It's been a really fascinating hour. I think the most important thing for me is people become advocates within their own organizations and communities against the climate crisis, and really take positive action. So I think we need to all work on kind of mainstreaming conversations around climate change into our business. So, when you're taking decisions in whichever forum, try and add an environmental element to that discussion. So are you thinking about the carbon emissions of something new you're doing at work? Or what about the e-waste? Or what about your own kind of recycling habits? But I think I just conclude with saying, it can be a scary topic and a scary time, but we all need to just try and take a really positive and proactive approach to creating a positive future.
Fantastic. Justin, your parting shot?
Climate change and biodiversity are such big topics, and they can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes. But food's actually a great place for these conversations to be centered in, because food's part of all of our daily kind of lives, and so much part of our culture, and kind of part of our survival as well. So I think as individuals and as businesses, understanding our role in trying to shift the food system, asking questions as consumers about where food comes from, how it's produced, who it's produced by, these are all great steps in just trying to keep this conversation going about improving the food system.
Zaki?
Intersectionality and partnerships are key, and we need to close that loop with government to ensure that there is alignment, because what we saw with the July unrest last year, and also with the floods in KZN, and you ask yourself, who are the people that are affected mostly by these two issues or incidents that I've mentioned? It's mainly the poor, and therefore we as a big business, working closely with civil society and with government, I am sure that we can be able to address some of these societal challenges. When people are hungry, sometimes they find themselves doing things that can devastate the nation, and therefore we need to solve for food security with whatever means that we have.
Thank you so much, Taki. Pavesh, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, thanks, Nikki. I mean, being the technologist in the room, I wouldn't advocate technology solves everything, but I think it's a super important part of it. But what I think it's really about is a multi-stakeholder network of participants being able to solve the problem together, powered by digital technology, and really, if I could say nothing else, but we need more investment so that the technology gets down to the lowest levels of society, so to help minimize the impact of food insecurity and climate change as a whole.
All right. And Stephen, I'll give you the final word.
Thank you, Nikki. I think technology can play a very important role, and all the different governments in Africa need to incorporate an element of planning around technology to ensure that there's food sustainability for the different countries in Africa.
Thank you all so much for what has been a fascinating, engaging, thought-provoking conversation. Really appreciate your insights. Certainly these kinds of dialogues need to continue, and the importance of demystifying and simplifying what seem like large and complicated issues, but are so critical, as Justin said. When we talk about food, it's about our survival. Therefore, we need to understand, all of us collectively, what is at play and what kind of role each sector of society can play in circumventing the worst effects of climate change and ensuring that there is enough food for all in a sustainable way. I'd like to thank then my panel so much for their time today, and of course, particularly our online audience for joining us and for your participation. We really appreciate that. Now, closing us off today is a video of the first smartphone-only town in South Africa. You would have heard Taki talking about this a bit earlier on. It's the first of its kind, which is powered by Vodacom. Let me tell you a little bit about it. In 2019, Vodacom and BPG Langfontein, a farming business within Mpumalanga, began pioneering an innovative network model within the town of Wakkerstroom with the aim of opening a new world of connectivity and access to information, creating the first smartphone-only town in South Africa. Let's take a look, and with that, it's goodbye.
So what we've done is we've effectively connected the town. We've put up, I think, additional 4 sites in the premises or in Wakkerstroom in this town, on the farm as well, and we provided the people with a device to connect them from 2G to 4G. We gave them a 4G device, and number 3, to use this as a case study to see if we can copy and paste in different places around the world.
Yeah, this collaboration started a few years ago. We experienced a lot of problems with communication. We had no signals except two-way radio communication. I identified Vodacom as the ideal partner to partner with to create communication for people and to uplift people in the area and to make their lives more easier.
Ons het gesukkel, ons het nie foneet nie. Maar hoe Vodacom ufake la, sakhona ukubona manje thina sesibadala. Sigcwele zonke izinto lapha ezithathayo, maphoyisa sakhona ukwafonela, makunenkinga nasigula i-ambulance sakhona ukuyicela, nabantu abami ngiyakhona ukukhuluma nabo. Nemali yami esiyithola la kunamzane ingena la. Sithola market.
Isikhathi esiningi ngisasemncane ngiyathanda ukusebenzisa into njengabo WhatsApp o Facebook kanjalo, but okakhulukazi naku ey'ntweni zami engisebenza ngazo ngiyakhona ukuthi ngiyicinge ngiyithole ngibe nolwazi olungcono.
I must say that this collaboration between BPG, Langfontein and Vodacom has been the best. This is like a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that you get. So to BPG, Langfontein, and specifically to Vodacom, I want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Izandla ziyagezana. En mangabe kuyiqiniso ukuthi izandla ziyagezana kumele zibambisane mawufuna kuya phambili. Mangabe uyabambisana nomunye, ukubonisana kuyoba khona futhi. Ngemva kokubonisana iplani liyotholakala, and lelo plani salithola.
To connect everyone is at the heart of what we want to do at Vodacom. We want to connect for a better future. And to connect for a better future means that we have to bridge that divide. And as soon as we bridge that divide, we'll give everybody the opportunity to be on a level playing field. And that's the crucial part for Vodacom. We want to connect for a better future, change people's lives and change our communities so that everybody in the country prospers.